Welcome, Mr. Meckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today. As I was standing out in the hall outside waiting to come into this committee room, I was reflecting on the fact that I get the chance to travel around the country and go into a lot of state legislatures. And as I do, I often reflect on the founders and the framers and what they would have thought were they able to walk into this august house. And what I will tell you here in this legislature is I believe this is a reflection of what the framers and the founders intended. Some states, not so much. They're huge legislatures, year-round legislatures, not what I would refer to as a citizen legislature. But I could well imagine Ben Franklin or Sam Adams walking into this building, walking up and down these halls and feeling at home, and meeting men and women like you see in your legislature and feeling at home because they understand that you are citizens that give up your time and your money to come here and to do true public service. So thank you for being here and reflecting what the framers and founders actually intended in our system of governance. Convention of States is intended to restore that system of governance intended by the framers of the United States Constitution. And we know specifically what they intended and what they were worried about by referring to Madison's notes from the convention in 1787. We all know the story of that convention. It was a hot, humid summer. They locked themselves in that building and they hammered out what I would say is inarguably the greatest system of governance ever instituted among men for the preservation of liberty. But they also understood human nature better than I think most do these days. And they understood that humans were sinful, fallen creatures and likely to stray from the path of righteousness. Not only likely, but absolutely going to stray. And so they told us that they were going to give us a provision in that Constitution that would allow us to do something about that. On September 15th, 1787, Colonel George Mason stands and he addresses the convention. This is 2 days before the end of convention. They're almost done with that beautiful document. And he says, we have a problem. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we've not given that power to the states. And he asks a question, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says basically, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Now, when I say that, people smile and laugh, and I imagine they did so at the convention. We don't know, obviously, we don't have videotape, but we do have Madison's notes. And Madison's notes very clearly at that point reflect what happened. It's two Latin abbreviations. It's the words nin com, which stand for no comment. What happened was everybody essentially slapped their foreheads and said, yes, we absolutely have to give this power to the states. How did we forget that? And we know that it was unanimous because they unanimously adopted this second clause of Article 5 that gives you the power that we're here to discuss. And they gave that power to you, the state legislators. And I have been asked many times, why would they give that power to the state legislators? When you guys come in and you get sworn into office, generally speaking, they don't tell you about your role in the federal government. You learn the building and where the legislative drafters are and maybe where your office is, but they don't tell you that you are actually the most powerful people in our system of federal governance. And what makes you the most powerful is this unique power that you have to call a convention, to propose amendments, and then ultimately to ratify those amendments, thereby changing the very structure of our system of governance that was given to you. And the reason that the framers gave that power to you is because they were you. Most of them served in colonial governments, in town councils. These were citizen public servants. They understood what it meant to be close to your constituents, and they wanted to give people the ultimate power who would be close to their constituents, like you are here in your state. You know the people in your district, and so did the framers. They understood this. So they gave you that power. And so here we are today. We have an organization that I represent, which has over 5 million grassroots activists all over the country in every single state legislative district, including here in Wyoming. And importantly, your constituents want you to do this. They want you to step up and rein in the federal government. Now, look, I don't think there's any argument among any of us that the federal government is completely out of control. The federal government is spending money at a pace that's unsustainable, regulating in a way that the American people are chafing under those regulations, and in a way that the framers and founders would have found absolutely unbelievable. And so we now find ourselves in a position where we actually can do something about it. Today, 19 out of the 34 requisite states have called for convention, states all across the country. I expect that we'll see somewhere between 4 and 7 more states join the call this session. The question is, will Wyoming? And the answer is, I believe, yes, and you should. Wyoming is, by the numbers, the most conservative state in the United States of America. Look at the way your legislature lays out. And this is the actual most conservative thing that a legislature can do. It is about the restoration of the system of federalism given to us by the framers of the United States Constitution. So I can tell you a lot of people around the country, when I travel around, I was talking with somebody yesterday on my drive in from Denver, and they said, wait, you're going to Wyoming? I figured Wyoming would be the first state to pass. Why hasn't Wyoming passed yet? And obviously legislatures have their own way they work, and the composition of houses changes from time to time. There's a lot of reasons, but I would say at this point in history, it is hopefully time for Wyoming to step up and pass this resolution. I get the common objection, the actually only objection I get to doing this is that we're going to have a runaway convention. And we're going to, quote unquote, I hear this all the time, we're going to lose our beloved Constitution. So I'd like to address that, and then I'd be happy to take questions. The framers, in addition to understanding human nature, had a deep understanding of process and structure. And if you look at our Constitution, it was built to ensconce these processes and structure. Often we hear them referred to as checks and balances into our system. And one of those checks and balances was Article 5. And they designed Article 5 as well as they designed anything else in the Constitution. When you look at the way Article 5 works, the simplest argument against the runaway convention is math. It takes 3/4 of states to ratify anything that comes out of convention. Convention is only a meeting for making suggestions. The word proposal is used. They can propose amendments. And then that amendment, any amendment that's proposed by convention has to go out to the states for ratification by 38 states. And I would make this challenge to anybody watching or listening who is concerned about the idea of a runaway convention. If you're worried about something as a conservative that you might not like that could come out of convention, do the exercise for yourself and list the 38 states on a sheet of paper that would ratify it. I'm going to give you a specific example because you can't do that. The example, the one I hear most often, is that we're going to lose our Second Amendment. And my son is a Marine. My mom was a lifelong law enforcement officer. We're very strong Second Amendment supporters in my family and in our organization. There are currently 25 states that have constitutional carry. You don't need a permit to carry your firearm. There are 24 states, not here, but 24 states that allow you to carry your firearm into a legislature. There are 14 states that allow you to take a loaded long gun, chamber around, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that's how many states allow that to happen. Now, remember, it takes only 13 states to prevent any amendment from becoming part of the Constitution. So the idea that you could get 38 states to ratify the repeal of the Second Amendment, or frankly, anything else that any conservative wouldn't like, is a fantasy, and it's ridiculous. And it's important where we remember the idea of a runaway convention, where it comes from. In the United States of America, the idea of a runaway convention didn't exist until the 1970s. It came after Roe versus Wade. States started passing applications to overturn Roe versus Wade, what states should do when they're unhappy with what the Supreme Court does. And ultimately, a letter was written by Chief Justice Warren Burger, the man who was the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade, saying the idea of a convention was a terrible idea and that it would lead to the destruction, it would lead to a runaway convention and the destruction of our beloved Constitution. So the guy that gave us Roe versus Wade, a very radical liberal jurist, is the guy that puts the idea out there of a runaway convention. And unfortunately today, that idea has been carried by a few on the right. I would argue maybe 5 to 10% of the people on the right, and almost 100% of the people on the left. Common Cause, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, La Raza, MoveOn.org, Planned Parenthood, and I would argue, and I apologize for being a little bit inflammatory, but every communist, baby-killing, America-hating organization in the United States of America stands united, locking arms. They've signed a press release against Convention of States. So I would close with the idea that people are worried, I have heard this, about the left taking over. The left isn't worried about that at all. What they're worried about is the idea of us getting together in a convention of states and taking the federal government and shoving it back in the constitutional box. So I would urge you to pass this resolution out of committee and start the process here in Wyoming of joining the Convention of States movement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meckler. Any questions for the gentleman? Any questions? I have one. I often get emails that say the Constitution isn't broken, and follow the Constitution. Just follow what's there. And you've probably heard this argument too. And so would you care to comment on that? I may add something too, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a good question. And it was actually, when this idea was first brought to me, that was the first question I asked. As a conservative, we generally have the opinion that the federal government doesn't follow the Constitution. And that question, I asked that question to Mike Ferris, who was my co-founder of this organization, noted constitutional attorney, one of the leading attorneys in the recent Dobbs case, just retired from being the leader of Alliance Defending Freedom. And this is what he said to me. He asked me a question which kind of shocked me. He said, "Which Constitution are you referring to?" And, well, I'm only aware of one, is what I said. And he said, well, we really have two in the United States of America. We have the one that you probably carry around in your pocket, the pocket Constitution. It's actually the original Constitution. We all know what it says. We know what it means. It's pretty clear on its face what it means. He said, but if you want to know the Constitution under which the United States government lives, you have to order that from the government publishing office. And you can order, it's about $130. It's over 3,000 pages at this point, and it's literally just called the Constitution of the United States of America. It contains every case ever issued by the United States Supreme Court telling us what your pocket Constitution means. And he said, so mostly they do follow the Constitution. It's just that one. And that's the one that has granted these wildly expanded federal powers that the framers never intended. And that's the one we're working to address with the Convention of States.